Thank you very much for being here. Saneel Radia is one of your illustrious predecessors. He was a graduate of Class 2 of the Executive MBA at the Alumnus School. You have his full bio in your module overview. He has had a lively career, long been part of the Publicis family. He worked at Denver when he was at the Berlin School. He was at BBH here in New York, where he worked very closely with Google. Now he wears several hats, two of which I'll mention. One with Finch 15, which he co-founded, which is really, I think, fascinating group that is committed to digital transformation of whole line more traditional companies. And the other project that he has founded is called The Greatest Good. And it's a nonprofit, and I think it's a really innovative approach to raising money for charity while providing top-flight executive advice and mentoring to those in a number of different areas. Maybe most importantly, beyond those professional pursuits, he's always been extraordinarily supportive as an alumnus of the school, and he told me he hasn't given a presentation in a couple of years, but he immediately accepted my invitation when I told him we were going to be here, and so I'm really delighted to be able to welcome. Please join me.
Thanks. Yeah, so David asked me to talk about reinventing marketing. It sounds like you guys have been talking about that already with some of my colleagues and other friends. So the funny part about my vision of the future of marketing is that it actually looks a lot more like innovation, which is to say that I think that marketing people have the skill sets to be innovation people, which is the thesis of what I'm about to present to you. Some of what I'm doing right now is kind of rooted in that same thesis. Of course, though, for marketing to get to be innovation would require some actual innovation, which makes this the clunkiest title of a presentation ever given. So I want to, just to be clear, this is the pitch I'm going to give you, why I think marketing people are most qualified to do innovation. It doesn't look like what innovation does today, but that's kind of what I'm here to talk about. Just so I have a sense, I know the room is not very marketing focused in general. Who here already has a marketing role of some kind? Oh, okay. More than I was expecting. And then what are some of the other backgrounds? Does anyone do anything in innovation at all specifically? You do? What's your role?
Product development.
Okay, digital product development?
Yeah.
Cool, where do you work?
For my own company.
Okay.
And specific clients that want innovation projects.
Oh, cool.
So that goes from big data processing to new ways of interaction.
Okay.
And especially startup product development from scratch.
Very cool. I see one more hand here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what do you do?
Well, digital transformation and service redesign.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. Cool. All right. So some of this will be familiar, and anything I'm doing, just look like you're really bored, and I'll skip over it. Cool. So really quick background on me, although that introduction by David actually covers most of it. As he mentioned, I run a company called Finch 15. We're an incubator inside the Publicis group, about 3 years old. As David said, it's actually less about digital transformation of the company as much as it is helping clients launch new businesses. So when you're a big company and you want to launch a new product or a new service or a new business, and it's not necessarily the core business you're in, generally you need the help of somebody. We are one of those partners. So we probably compete most often with IDEO, a company called Pre-Hype, companies like that. We're an incubator for hire. We do everything an incubator does except we sell it to you as services. The difference in kind of how we approach incubation is, so like any incubator, we're here to make companies or businesses that make money. Our unique approach to it, and this is why I believe that the future of marketing looks something like this, is I think there's actually a really strong alignment with being able to build a brand. So if you're a big company and you have a really powerful brand, probably the most forgotten asset for that big company when they try to do something new is their brand, and we try to help big companies do that. I won't belabor that point because hopefully as we start talking about what's happening in the world, you'll see why I think that. To be clear, I'm not going to show you our own work. When I was sitting in that seat, I always find it most boring when people come in and only present their own work. So I try to bring a bunch of other things that are not things we've done, with one very small exception. More importantly, though, I was a graduate of the school. I did my thesis, just to give you a little bit of a sense of what my thesis was about. It was about media design, which ended up being a practice I launched at Danu, the agency I worked at. But then when I went to BBH, I actually brought it over to BBH to restart their engagement planning group. It still exists there today. It's their most profitable group. That then turned out, after I left, have many of my team members then leave and go start that same thing at other agencies, Go5, BBDO, other places. So I will say, I don't think I'm the exception to the rule where this kind of homework I had to do here ended up being something that's shown up at multiple agencies, and it's currently doing pretty well in the industry, which is exciting. Of course, I've since left advertising, but hey, it was something. But probably the thing I'm most proud of is, before our thesis presentations, I convinced, of course it was the men that were susceptible to it, I convinced them that I read a study that said people are less likely to ask hard questions of men with mustaches. So I got about, I think, 8 of them at the time to grow a mustache to present their thesis. So that's probably I would say my best legacy at Berlin School.
Did that work?
Exactly. Okay, so innovation. When I first was made the head of innovation at BBH, running something called BBH Labs, the thing I found most striking is not a single person could tell me what innovation was. The CEO of the company could not tell me what innovation was. That's not a criticism of him. It was just a reflection of one thing I find most hilarious about working in innovation is everyone says the word, everyone talks about it, a lot of people say they work in it, and then very few people want to tell you what that actually means. So I'm going to start by trying to define it, because I did what I do at most of my jobs when I start, which is I Googled it. And so I Googled innovation, and I found this really simple definition, which I loved, which is innovation is the introduction of something new, according to Merriam-Webster. I like that. It's simple. It's pretty clear. New. Who doesn't like new? A little bit too broad, though, right? I mean, doing anything new, that would mean I could, pitch a cardiology practice to an ad agency, and I would be, in theory, doing innovation for them. So I with apologies to Merriam and Webster, I edited it a little bit to say it has to be new and relevant. So this is a nice, simple definition. I still use it years later. A lot of our clients now use this definition. Very straightforward. There's 3 actual checkboxes in this, so to make sure you're reading it the same way as I am. Introduction. It has to actually come out of the lab to be innovation. Like your cool thoughts in a room that no one ever sees don't count as innovation as I define it. New, probably the easiest part. It has to be new. New for you is still innovation even if someone else has already done it. And it has to be relevant. Defining relevant is probably the hardest part about innovation. This is the part most people disagree on the most. What does relevant actually mean for us? What does it mean for our company? How do I make the case that something is relevant and new? That's actually one of this being the hardest part about innovation is actually the part I think marketers are going to be best at. So I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail, but those are the 3 checkboxes I'm seeing as we go through this. Any questions or comments about this so far?
Yeah. Doesn't it go in line with the creativity?
That is a wonderful question, and a slide I have prepared. But because I'm looking at a different view of my slides, I can't jump to it. So, yes, very much so. I think in particular, marketers are really good at new because they are by nature more creative. I have a thought on why I think our particular marketer type of creativity is relevant for innovation, which is the back half of this presentation. So we will definitely talk about that. Yeah?
Do you think it's too radical to say that the relevant part could be like what changes behaviors, for instance?
I think it's too radical to say that? No, not necessarily. I think that I would say the hardest part about deciding what's relevant is making the case that it is relevant for your company. I mean, I think that's the hardest part. And I think a lot of companies struggle with like you walk into the CEO's office and you say, I have a new idea, it's relevant for us and we should introduce it. You might argue over how to introduce it. You're probably not going to argue over whether it's new. You are definitely going to argue over whether it's relevant. So I'd say it's the hardest part. I'm not sure it's the most radical, if I'm honest with you. And we'll talk more about that as well. Any other thoughts just before I keep moving? Cool. So why is innovation important? This is just a couple slides on I think a lot of things that people say that aren't really well understood, so forgive me if you've kind of heard all this or are familiar with it, but I think it just helps to get on the same page. Innovator's Dilemma is brought up a ton. When I read this book, I don't know how many years ago now, it completely changed the way I thought about business. That's Clayton Christensen. He wrote it. Who here's read Innovator's Dilemma? You have? Normally it's more than that, just two. This is, and Jess, congratulations, Jess, thank you. It's actually, Jess works with me at Finch 15, and Greatest Fit, actually. And it's kind of standard issue at our company. But you should all read it. Seriously, it takes 3 hours. It's a very quick read. It's a lot of outdated examples, but you'll find that even though the examples are old, all of the thoughts are still, 95% accurate. So let me just define Innovator's Dilemma for you, because it's interpreted differently. You are a company. You do something. You are good at that something. Your dilemma is, do you keep spending money doing the thing that you're good at, or do you stop spending money there, and not just money, all your resources, people, time, energy, etc., on doing something that is not yet a market, something completely new. That is your dilemma. You are successful because you're good at something. Do you keep getting better at doing that thing, or do you try and do something new? In retrospect, the answer is always try to do something new for a market that doesn't exist yet. The problem is when you run a company and things are going well, you look like an idiot if you say, let's stop doing the one thing we've been doing and do something completely unrelated. Yet history proves that almost always you lose when you keep doing the same thing you've always done. That is Innovator's Dilemma in a nutshell. I work with, actually he's a Berlin School advisor, a fellow named Rashad Tabakawala. His phrase for this is, the future comes from the slime. I'm a huge believer in that. Something that doesn't look interesting, doesn't look relevant, looks like it's kind of outside of your business, is actually probably where the future lies. And you should be spending time and effort on it now. Does that all make sense in terms of what Innovator's Dilemma is? Yes, sir?
And it can also be counterintuitive because your customers may not be asking for what you're contemplating.
That is exactly right. So what he said was, it might be something your customers are not asking for. That's what makes it a dilemma. This market doesn't exist yet. The easiest example of that, at least I find easy, is the United States railroad industry. The railroad industry was the dominant industry of the industrial age at that time. Everyone who ran one of those was rich. It's where all the money was. They spent all this money on making railways better, faster, more efficient, expanding lines, et cetera, et cetera. At the same time, something called the automobile industry was emerging. The automobile had been invented. It was vastly ignored because there was no market for that. There weren't even highways for it. People weren't buying it. At that time, the automobile was considered a long-distance vehicle, and trains were considered the rail system was considered short. So it just didn't seem like it was the same industry. And lo and behold, an entire industry was disrupted because it turns out it was all the same industry, and it was called mobility and transportation, right? This happens over, newspapers were crushed by Google because it didn't look like that was something that mattered to them. This happens over and over and over again. The second reason, speaking of Google, that innovation is important is Google, and when I say Google, I really mean Alphabet as it's now defined. But Google, that big company. When companies like Google care a lot about innovation, it doesn't matter what business you work in, innovation is now important to you. Because, well, three things. One, as they decide to invest money in new things, those new things may turn out to be your industry. BMW is a big client of ours. We're helping them with things like autonomous vehicles and what that looks like. The leader in the autonomous vehicle space is Google. In theory, what started as a search engine company. That's really scary if you're an automotive company, right? Like this, suddenly you're competing with a company you never even had on your radar as a competitor, right? The second thing is that you actually tend to trade on the same stock markets as companies like this. And guess what? Investors really like innovation. There's actually a pretty amazing stat around how the word innovation used to be in like 2 to 3% of annual reports about as recently as 15 years ago, and now it's in the vast majority. And it's on every other page, and it's all anyone you just put the word innovation in your quarterly report or your annual report because that's what shareholders want. So innovation is important kind of even if you don't want it to be, or it doesn't seem like it's used in your industry. Okay, so let's look a little bit at how innovation has changed. I'm going to use an example here, which is a company called GE, which everyone probably knows. GE is arguably one of the most innovative companies in history. They have a long track record of it. You can't be around for a couple hundred years and make more money every year if you're not innovative. This is a film that GE made in 1955. Yes, there was branded content back then. This is an actual film they put out. It was about how they were going to help their clients be more innovative.
The United States, once an essentially agricultural country, has become the world's most important plant for the production of goods, with plenty of room left for food and fiber crops. Each person works for the other. All consume each other's goods and products. Our numbers are growing fast, but our demand for goods is growing much faster. At the same time, business is getting more and more competitive. For if demand is growing, so is supply, as new competitors appear or old ones increase their efficiency. To hold or to build our share of the available market, we must cut production costs by applying the principles of automation.
Automation.
Manufacturing operations can be separated into 3 broad groups. First is the manual area, where physical effort is used to perform operations by hand
Yes, even in
or with the aid of
1955, we were talking
hand
about
tools.
replacing humans with robots.
Second is the mechanization area, where manually operated, power-driven machines with varying degrees of control are used to perform one or more operations. Third is the area of continuous automatic production, where automatic machines are integrated with transfer devices and with controls to perform.
So I'll cut it off there. This is how innovation was defined in the industrial age. It is you do something, you need to apply technology, apply machines, apply new chemistry, whatever it is, and do it faster, better, get rid of the humans, make it robots, more efficient, more competition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, this was, for decades, the way innovation was used. For the sake of this presentation, I'm going to call that vertical innovation, okay? Just think of it as getting better and better, optimizing efficiency. Basically, every word he just said is in the word cloud that is vertical innovation, okay? That is what GE made their living on. They invented the jet engine. I mean, they're very good at saying, okay, transportation does this. What is a huge technology that can change the way it works, okay? This is now GE in a program that was launched 2 years ago. They partnered with a company called Quirky. Is anyone familiar with Quirky? You are? Okay, for the rest of the group, Quirky is an invention platform. It's where if you're an inventor, you pitch an idea, other people support your idea, and then you work with Quirky to bring it out. It's generally consumer goods. So I have an idea for a new umbrella. I design the umbrella. It isn't crowdsourced because Quirky then tells me exactly how to make it. They tell me whether or not that's an idea that can move forward, but it's very much a process that goes from a lot of people to them making a decision, back out to a lot of people, and then when you buy a Quirky product and you open the manual, it has the name of all 300 people that helped design that thing, and you all get a cut of the revenue. Does that make sense? So GE, again, huge multi-billion-dollar company, is working with, Quirky, an invention platform, and I was so excited to hear the announcement, and they said, okay, the first product is ready of what we worked on. And this was the video.
Hi, I'm Ben, and this is the Egg Minder. This is one of the first products we did with our friends at GE. It's a very simple product, but it's absolutely amazing. It's an egg tray that goes in your fridge. It holds eggs. It holds actually 14 of them. And it actually keeps track of how many eggs you have at any given time. So let's say you're at the market, and you want to know, well, do I need eggs or not?
Do I need eggs?
You just look at your phone, you look at the app, and it says, yeah, you need eggs. But the best feature, the feature I think is most cool, there's little LEDs next to each egg, and it tells you what the oldest egg is. And you just sort of take it, and you see the next LED pops on, tells you that's the next oldest egg, yep. And then you go, and then bam, cooking some eggs.
I would not recommend
Very
cooking
simple,
with the shells.
the first of a long line of GE Quirky products that are coming out, and a very wonderful one. Go ahead and invent your own GE and Quirky products at quirky.com/GE.
You saw the inventor, the original inventor position there. By the way, see how it said GE and Quirky at the end? We're going to come back to this. There's a huge update on this particular thing in the last 2 months. So my first reaction when I saw this was, what the fuck? This company invented the fucking jet engine, the incandescent light bulb, the refrigerator, okay? And they just partnered in a multi-million-dollar relationship. By the way, the most surprising part about this relationship is GE gave away all their patents to the inventors. I mean, that is what makes GE so valuable in this case. All those things that they own patents on, and they own patents on everything, they actually gave away. If a couple people worked in like hardware and manufacturing, you never give your hardware patents away. Like that is the first rule of thumb, although that's been changing in the last year. Certainly 2 years ago, it was mind-boggling. And I was confused. I thought maybe I didn't understand this innovation thing at all. Maybe I don't actually know what I'm talking about. And I honestly probably still don't. But then it occurred to me that in this photo, it's actually that's the lateral innovation. See, this is the thing that GE has no chance of ever being able to make. So what they're good at is going and spending $1 billion in a secret lab where you probably have to like scan your retina to get into to come back with like a jet engine or like a nuclear reactor or something insane. But what they can't do is make a lot of micro network things in a home that all tie together in a single smart experience. That's really hard for them. Even though it feels very relevant to them because it's home networking, right? It's your home, your home appliances. The networking part is a lateral innovation for them. That's very hard. That takes user experience. It takes a ton of data management and things that they're not very good at. But most importantly, it just takes being able to make things talk to each other. Yep, go ahead.
It's meant a little bit like PR story for professional electrics.
I have no doubt they used it as a...
I mean, even if nobody asks about no market for that, people talk about it's money, it's there.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Definitely. The question or comment, if you didn't hear it, was this smells a bit like PR. 100%. There's a lot of PR in this. Giving away your patents and spending, let's say $50 to $100 million though, makes it at least a little bit more legitimate. Does $100 million matter to GE? Enough to notice, right? It's like getting a thorn in your thumb. You're gonna care enough if it doesn't go well. This didn't go well. I'm gonna come back to why in a bit. But at the very least, it shows us that even a company that's dominant in innovation like GE has to fundamentally change the way they're going about this. They're trying something new. This wasn't successful for them. We'll get to why. But it shows that even a company of that size and that stature has to approach their innovation much differently. This kind of trying a completely new business, working in new models that aren't your core business, is what we're going to start calling lateral innovation for the sake of this talk. Okay, I'm going to define these a little bit better, but loosely speaking, one being about efficiency, optimization, same thing better, the other being completely new, market isn't proven yet, we don't know exactly where we're going, lateral innovation. Make sense? Cool. Basically, every major company, and I mean mega company, that's been born in the last 15 years, and let's look at the Fortune 100 companies. All the ones that are 15 years old or younger have made their living on lateral innovation. That is what they do. Amazon is a wonderful example. Amazon, we all know their story. Amazon.com is where, it was an e-commerce site, and e-commerce is about price, logistics, and it's a B2C business. Lo and behold, though, Amazon has a whole family of different things now, from this, what started as a company that was supposed to just sell you things online. Does anyone here own Amazon stock? Yeah. You don't ever make money on Amazon stock, as you know, because every time Amazon makes money, they put it into making new things for themselves. That's the approach of lateral innovation. They're a case study in lateral innovation, right? So what's interesting, though, is when you look at the results of this, Amazon has always put the money they make into trying new things. Now about 2/3 of their money comes from what we think of as the original Amazon, but 1/3 of their money, and that's a big pie, right? If you do the math, I mean, we're talking about a lot of money here, approaching $100 billion. Media, things like Amazon Studios, right? So when Amazon is making TV, it's not on TV, but you get the point, where people vote on what pilot gets made into a second episode, that's a completely different business. Why would an e-commerce company be in the content business? Well, it turns out they felt like that was relevant for them because of a little something called Prime. But this is the most interesting one, Amazon Web Services. So for those not familiar with it, basically if you're any company using like scaled web services, and you are not Google or Facebook, and you're not so poor you can't afford it, you probably use Amazon Web Services. In other words, your entire business runs off servers that are owned by Amazon. So this B2B pricing logistics business, actually now their fastest growing unit is, B2C pricing and logistics is now B2B, and their primary business is encryption and a lot of actual hardware development. That is just a completely different business. That is what we mean by lateral innovation. This is typical of most new companies, right? Big new companies. Which brings us to, okay, so then what is the opportunity for marketers? If that's what we're talking about here, the future of marketing, what is that opportunity? I think the opportunity is actually, again, introduction, relevant, new. Those are the three boxes I care about in innovation. There's a shift toward lateral innovation. Hopefully that's all making sense. I think the opportunity is actually, at first, helping big clients. And let me talk about that, but certainly there's a huge opportunity with startups as well, but let's talk about the low-hanging fruit first. This is something you've probably had said to you 100 times since you started the Berlin School, or on every article you've ever read, or I don't know, I feel like at this point like it's inside fortune cookies. It's attributed to 1 million people, sometimes it's fail early, fail fast, fail. Great. It's said by actually one of the smartest people and nicest guys in the world, who founded IDEO, David Kelly, who's fantastic. The problem is normally when you say fail fast and fail often, and it's certainly back when this was, at its peak 2 or 3 years ago, most big company CEOs, they don't even bother saying it anymore, but they kind of all go, I can't do that. Sorry, I'm just not allowed to fail fast and fail often. I definitely can't. The word fail is bad for me. And generally the argument is, well, look at this big old company. They're too dumb and old to know that the world changed. And then if you're a big CEO or a big CSO or whatever, you're just kind of say, okay, well, this is an argument that isn't worth having because anyone I talk to tells me that therefore my lunch is going to be eaten because I can't play with all these new nimble players. That, I will argue, is a false narrative about David and Goliath. Every media article ever written is how David has the advantage over Goliath. But if we're all familiar with the story, David won because Goliath forgot to wear a helmet. So, if we could just maybe help Goliath put on a helmet, maybe there's an opportunity here. And this is where I think marketers can help, right? So, let's talk about the first role. Again, introduction, relevant, new. I'm going to start with relevant to go back to a question about relevancy that came up earlier. And I think marketers are uniquely qualified to define what relevant means. And I'll use an example here. So if you think of innovation as high risk versus high reward, this is so oversimplified, I know, but for the sake of argument. Generally, that first type of innovation we talked about, vertical innovation, is low risk, low reward, right? So I mentioned, let me talk about automotive since I brought it up already. Actually, let's talk about Volkswagen since we brought it up already. So it is very clear the impact that fuel efficiency has on sales. If you're a car company, you know that if you get to 40 miles per gallon, 45 miles per gallon, there's a bump in sales of 3%, 4%, 5%. If you're Volkswagen, you just pretend to get there and don't actually invest in the innovation to do it. That is vertical innovation. It's low risk and low reward because you have a clear goal. You just need to achieve it. You might not know how to get there, but if you do get there, you'll get this bump in sales. That's low reward as well because it's established in the industry. Basically, the GE sales pitch you watched earlier about automation was that. Hey, get robots going and all turn around and money, money, money. On the other end is lateral innovation. This is that hard stuff we were talking about. Completely new offerings. The things, when you do lateral innovation, you're looking for not like a 4 or 5% increase, you're looking for a 5, 10, 100x return on doing something completely new. There might not be a customer for it yet, but if you get there early enough and do it right, then it could be a huge return down the road. That is lateral innovation, right? Again, why is Amazon making content? Why are they in the web service business? Because they believe, and so far have been proven right, that those are businesses with high returns for them. That's lateral innovation. That's really scary because you're wandering off into the unknown. This is less scary but still really hard because you're heading toward a specific destination. My belief is that marketers can make this lateral innovation brand-led innovation because if you're wandering into the unknown and it's about something that there isn't yet a market for, then isn't the marketing department at your company most qualified to tell you like, hey, this is something we should try? So when you're in that argument over, is this relevant? The marketers should be the ones, our brand is qualified to do this. We know our consumers well enough to know that this is something they're going to want in the future or they're already starting to want even if they don't know it yet. This is the right experience to bring it to life. That's what I would call brand-led innovation. And if you do that right, then in theory, you should be able to mitigate the risk of that innovation, right? So it's still high return, but it's less risky because in the worst case, let's say it's a total failure, it was good for your brand. Like you know what, at least let the CEO go up there and say, actually, I'm gonna write that off as a marketing expense. It was good for our brand. That's really hard to do. This is a complicated set of strategies, which I think most marketers find easier than most other people inside a big company, right? So I want to use an example of something that I think illustrates this really well, which is the Nike Fuel Band. So the Nike Fuel Band is, by definition, a corporate definition of failure, right? It was launched, tried it for 2 years. Honestly, the hardware kind of sucked. Who here had a Fuel Band? Anyone? Obviously, David. Yeah. Do you guys still wear wearables now? Is that an Apple Watch on your wrist? What's over here? Are you wearing a wearable right now?
An Apple Watch?
You have an Apple Watch?
I do have it. I'm not wearing that.
Okay. So what's interesting is that the Fuel Band, again, they tried it for 2 years and then laid off the team and it was shut down, etc. But if you look at every Nike metric prior, sales, number of people participating on Nike Plus, which is the big platform that all of this is tied to, and perception of the Nike brand as something beyond just being an accessory, a sports accessories brand, Nike is up across all of those since the introduction of the fuel ban. So they launched something, and again, all of these numbers are going up, but there's a really clear 2-year window where they went boop, 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 and now they're starting to grow back at a slower rate again, but that leap was fundamental. That's still in their business, right? Nike Plus now has 40 million people using them, right? I mean, that's a platform. And the reason is Nike, it turns out, sucked at hardware. I bought a fuel band, it broke. I bought another one, it broke immediately, and I was like, I'm done. And I bought a Fitbit. They're very good at saying, great, you have your own hardware, you have an Apple Watch, you have a Jawbone, whatever it may be, but our platform, A, you become a potential customer for them to sell to, and B, they have a tremendous amount of data so they can figure out what the next new thing is, which has already been reflected in what they're doing in basketball, by the way. Cool. Second role for marketers in this case is being midwives, right? Introduction, relevant, new. We talked about relevant. This is introduction. A marketer, I think, can help big clients actually birth new ideas elegantly and safely. If you're a good midwife, you bring a new idea into the world in a place where it's best equipped to survive and grow, right? So let's talk about that a little bit. Because one of the biggest misconceptions is that small companies are agile and they can just experiment and do all this stuff. Actually, a disproportionate number of successful startups, if you look at private capitalization, which I know is a terrible metric, but generally what's used, of startups that are successful or big now, actually all used an incubator or an accelerator, or come out of a very specific kind of VC that supposedly gives you more than just money. That's, well, A, scary because it's a bit of like a white men's club, which is alarming, but let's put that aside. And let's look at that if you are, in theory, agile and quick and can do all these things, you're still looking for help bringing your idea to life. In the way a big company is always scared to do that, actually small companies are really scared to do that too. And the reason is if you make new products, you don't have any experience launching products before. And if you already have experience launching products and you're already big and you don't know how to do it in a nimble way. So there's kind of no one with that white level experience unless you end up being an accelerator or an incubator, right? So startups need help kind of birthing ideas too. And I think that marketers are really well equipped to help companies do this, small or big, which is if you understand, again, if you understand customers and and in theory, if you're a marketer, you understand research, and feedback loops and all the things that we normally do. When you look at, this is something out of the lean startup, which you may be familiar with. Everything here, which might use different words than marketers use, is really just stuff that most marketers know how to do. But they just don't position it as, let us help you birth ideas into the world, right? And it is, it's a different set of services and there are things that have to change, but I think the core skills are there. So I'll use one example, which is actually out of an ad agency. A lot of you ended up working in marketing, so you're familiar with Drogify. This is something they did a few years ago, which I love, that I just showed to as many people as I can.
Hi, I'm Graham, and this is my twin brother. 10 years ago, he was diagnosed with leukemia, but thankfully, his life was saved by a complete stranger who had registered to be a marrow donor. He was lucky, though. You see, more than 650,000 people are diagnosed with leukemia and lymphoma every year. And for the most severe cases, like my brother's, a marrow transplant is their last hope. But only about half find a match. Unfortunately, the Marrow Donor Registry is one of the most underrepresented donor programs in the world. And it's no wonder, really. Most people think that registering as a marrow donor is painful and complicated, when really, all it takes is a couple drops of blood. The only pain is actually finding a way to register. Now, you have to either take time out of your busy day to go to a special doctor, or order a registration kit online, pay $16 for it, and while you're at it, pay for the shipping. We've made it so difficult to register. It's amazing that a few good people out there care enough to jump through all these hoops just to save a random person's life. But the fact is, most don't. Imagine, though, how many lives could be saved if registering as a marrow donor wasn't so hard. What if we could turn a normal, everyday act into a chance to save a life? Introducing Help. I Want to Save a Life. A package of over-the-counter bandages that also doubles as a simple marrow donor registry kit. So the next time you cut yourself shaving or shuffling papers or making dinner and you reach for a box of bandages, you'll have a chance to save someone's life. You just put a couple of drops of blood on the swabs, toss it in the prepaid envelope, drop it in the mail, and that's it. You're a potential lifesaver. This simple idea brought together a pretty unlikely pair. Help Remedies, a pharmaceutical company, and DKMS, the world's largest marrow donor registry. And then something pretty amazing happened. The TED Conference chose it as one of their favorite ideas of the year and even helped us launch it at this year's global conference. And since then, the whole world's helped us spread the word.
This was a few years ago.
And share our story. And in just a few short months, sales of Helps bandages are already up more than 1,900%. But amongst all these sales figures and media impressions and YouTube hits, there's really only one statistic that matters. Thanks to this little pack of bandages, marrow registrations have nearly tripled. Who would have thought a few paper cuts could make a world of difference and actually save lives?
So I love that idea. It's, genius, simple, great. Everything about it is good. What's interesting is if you look at the kind of bone, if you're in the marrow registry, right? Prior to this, your best tool was direct response advertising, and basically it led to like you mail someone, you hope they mail you back, and then you send them a kit. You can't just send the kits out because they're too expensive, because the response rates are too low. What isn't mentioned in this video, because that's actually after their first year, but where this is now, is actually one of the best forms of acquisition that these guys have is through hotel minibars. So when you cut your finger at a hotel and you're very unlikely, you're one of those people who just was never going to sign up for this because the hardest part is getting people to volunteer to give their blood and cut themselves. It takes a marketer's thinking, I think, to get to this premise of, well, if asking for someone's blood is the hardest part, then let's make that the starting point of when we ask. Simple, again, it's one of those brilliant ideas because it's obvious after, but no one had it before. So now you cut yourself, you open the mini bar or whatever the first aid kit is in your hotel, and lo and behold, you become part of the marrow registry. That's awesome, but that's birthing an idea, that's bringing an idea to market at the right stage. I mean, you saw the numbers, it's a 2,000% increase in its first year, and that number's only gone up and up and up. That's incredible, but it's because it was brought to life the right way, and it took in this case, an ad agency to do that. It doesn't even matter if the client was a pharmaceutical company or the bone marrow registration, right? Like you guys see how it's how you bring it out into the world that changed everything, every dynamic in that business. Does that point make sense about birthing ideas and being a midwife, right, and marketer thinking? Cool. So now that update on the Quirky GE thing we talked about. So this is from 2 months ago. Ben, the guy who you saw who doesn't know how to make eggs in the egg minder video. It turns out Quirky, his company, not GE, Quirky filed for bankruptcy. And this is him being interviewed about it. And I want you to hear his explanation, because he specifically talks about the GE stuff, about why he says it didn't work.
Let's stick with Quirky for a minute, because it was such a compelling vision that, you know, that inventors could just come up with a great product.
Does it make me cry?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I mean, they could come up with a great product and come to you and you would take it from beginning to end. Why did that fail?
A few reasons. Number one is because our main point of distribution was big box retail, our margins were thin. Also because we had so much distribution in big box retail.
Margins were thin makes it sound like you were making money.
We were making a thin amount of gross margin, and then we had a not so thin amount of expenses associated with
that. And
the rest
math
of the business.
suggests that's a pretty big negative number.
That is a huge negative number. That was one of the big problems was, you know, relying on big box retail. Retailers want to make 60, 70 points of margin. The second thing is because we were in so many retail doors, mid last year we were in 50,000 retail doors, any new product that came out, just to fill the shelves, we were making tens of thousands of units. So the very basis of the idea of Quirky, where we can prove an idea is good and sort of stage gate the product development process, broke largely because of sort of the traditional bounds of brick and mortar retail. The second big portion of it was the brand couldn't necessarily stretch as much as we thought it could. So it worked well when we were making small little fun stuff like core management products and power strips, and people didn't mind buying a Quirky power strip. But when we started making, you know, $350 air conditioners, people don't want a Quirky air conditioner. They want a good one that works. You know, the brand didn't work in those categories. Was it a naming problem, or? In that case, it was the brand couldn't stretch, which meant, you know, we had to create all these sub brands, and it just, you know, at the end of the day, we were trying to build a modern invention platform, and there was a point where it just became too expensive.
And so you were now in
just to kind of hit some of the points, I'm going to stop this here. Ignore that slide for a second. The two reasons that he cited is why they failed. Number one, their launch, because they were in 50,000 big box retailers. That doesn't make any sense. Everything we just talked about, small companies know better, this big company and a small company came together, and then the big company had this amazing brand, GE. I would welcome a GE product in my home, as billions of people have, but they named it Quirky. They named it the small company's name. You don't want to buy a smoke detector that says Quirky on it. I mean, that is just, of course, it doesn't sound right at all. And then the thing that the startup in theory has, which is like, oh, we know how to stage gate, release things, iterate, make sure that if the air conditioner isn't perfect the first time, we'll get a new model out quickly. They took the big company's way of doing that. I mean, this is just completely misunderstanding what both parties brought to the table, right? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It actually is really sad. I love Ben, A, because he's like the nicest guy in the world, but B, he's also very honest about things that went wrong. But the brand part, I think, is important, right? So when we're talking about, like, if you're a marketer and you understand the value of, like, what brand matters and who wants it, and you know how to birth ideas, you see how this looks like a partnership that actually could have worked, but it just felt like there wasn't a marketer in the room to help them understand I think most marketers are pretty obvious points, right? So I just thought that was kind of a good lesson, a very relevant new lesson in this space, which is maybe there is a role for a marketing person in something like that could have turned this around, or at least help them avoid some pretty, I think, obvious in retrospect, disastrous decisions. Which brings us to the last kind of role of marketers here, which is concepting new. Who asked the creativity question? Was it you? Yeah. So the general thought is marketing people are creative, therefore they can have new ideas. I believe that to be true, but I try to take a pseudo-scientific approach to looking at innovations to see if I could map what I think of as kind of different types of creativity against where innovations come from, okay? So we're gonna just talk about like how concepting new ideas work. I'm gonna just go through a few innovations. Again, these are like, some of them are huge world-changing innovations, others are small, dumb things, but they all fall into what looks like 3 buckets, okay? Think of it as 3 different approaches to getting to innovations. This could not, and I did say pseudo-scientific, this is a very loose set of buckets. There's a million ways to argue against them. We can argue about it afterwards, but but I think it's at least helpful as a framework when you look at it. So the first way is simplifying problems. Now this is, again, easy to say, but what does simplifying a problem mean? And I want to use 2 huge innovation examples to get this across. This is the Berlin School, so I don't need to give anyone kind of a World War II history lesson here. But most historians would agree that World War II was decided based on code breaking and code making, right? Once Enigma was cracked, it was clearly a turning point in the war, and then the Allies won. Prior to Enigma being cracked, actually the greatest innovation that the Allies had was actually out of the US military, and it was this group called the Navajo Code Talkers, okay? Let me first talk about how code breaking works simply. There's a really interesting book on this. It's way too long, but it's super nerdy and I loved it. Code breaking, let me state the obvious. You have to know the language to break the code. That makes sense. I can't decode a German or Japanese message if I don't speak those languages, or an English message for that matter. Number 2, it's all, even today, after doing this for literally 1,000 years, humans decode and code messages. They do it in new ways, but the core of it is pattern recognition. In languages, for example in English, the letter E is our most common letter. The letter T and H tend to go together a lot. These are certain types of words come together, right? Again, the way Enigma was broken was there was a weather report every morning. Knowing it's about the weather and knowing the time of day was the beginning of a pattern recognition and something that the Allies could then crack, right? Here's what's interesting. The US, prior to that, had an idea, which is one of the generals in the military, and brought this to all the Allies, realized that the Navajo Indians, which are Native Americans, right, so the people that were here before European settlers arrived, who have been incredibly mistreated. The Navajo in particular were very unique in that they have no shared language with anyone else. There's not a single thing anyone here speaks that shares an etymology with the Navajo Indians. They also are unique in that they are it's an oral language. Technically you can write it down, but it's not really done, right? In fact, the Navajo have such independent language development that 2 Navajo tribes generally cannot communicate with each other, which might be why they go to war often. But that's how independent these languages are. So this general found 40 Navajo Indians, and instead of making them their own battalion, basically deposited these 40 across different groups across the Allied Army, right? Primarily US, but other as well. Then they would speak to each other. Now, to be clear, there's no word for helicopter in Navajo, okay, or a particular type of aircraft carrier. So they use different words for birds, for all the flying vehicles, different types of birds, and map them to it. different types of fish for all the floating and or submersed vehicles. And then the Navajo would just speak to each other over the radio in the open. In Navajo, there's no way to crack that code. It is the only 100% secure wartime communication from this war, which is just Navajos speaking in their native tongue to one another. To be clear, it's not coded at all. It is an open frequency of chat. That was unbreakable. And I thought that was such a genius idea. And again, this was actually the beginning of a turning point in code breaking prior to the Enigma shift, because it simplifies the problem. Everything in this space has been about complicating it, hiding patterns more, to finding other ways to maybe use math to break patterns. And this is that's all kind of, if you look at it, vertical innovation, all moving in one direction. And this is a really simple outside approach to the same problem. I thought that was just a really great example of that. The second one, and everyone talks about Bitcoin, I know. Who here actually knows what the blockchain is? Yes. Do you want to get up here and explain it to everyone?
Not really, it's a ledger, right?
It's exactly a ledger. That's exactly it. So Bitcoin, whether Bitcoin survives or not, has introduced, and I hope it does, because I've bought way too much of it. But the blockchain in particular is actually what I think Bitcoin's legacy is going to be. So in history, generally when you have something you want to protect, you hide it. And this goes back to, you just hide it. You put it in a safe and hide it. Or you hide it out in the open. But either way, you hide it. The goal is to let less people see it. The reason Bitcoin is completely secure is because Bitcoin says, actually, to make something secure, we should put it in the open for everyone to see. So the way a Bitcoin transaction works is when David pays me in Bitcoins for whatever it is that, for the arms I sold him, he's actually going to do that in a way where the math that leads to our calculation is based on every transaction prior to that. There's a public ledger of every Bitcoin transaction, and the only way to make a new one is using the numbers from the ones prior. So the only way to undo that would be if basically 51% of the world got together and undid everything and rebuilt it together. You just can't. The math is impossible because everyone has seen it.
It's distributed too, which is kind of, I think, part of the key.
Exactly that. It's distributed. So there's no central thing. It is a public ledger that lives in the open as much as possible. That doesn't mean you know the people involved, but you know the two destinations of the people exchanging money. That's a really simple idea. It's now being used in other parts of finance and medicine. I mean, it's a simple idea, but it just radically changes all the stuff we've been working on relating to security. I mean, it just changes how you think about security or documentation or anything. It's a simplified problem, which I love. So, simplifying problems, that all makes sense as a bucket of how innovations show up, right? The next one is combining unrelated fields, and I'll start to speed up here. How am I doing on time, David?
You're fine.
Okay. So combining unrelated fields is another way to get to innovations, right? Again, some examples that there's a great book on this subject called The Medici Effect. Anyone read that? No, you have? Great. Then this next example is out of there. Also worth reading, quick book. It basically talks about what happens when two different expertise collide. This building is a building in Zimbabwe. Anyone heard of this, the Eastgate building? Anyone? No, that's a head scratch. The Eastgate building is in Zimbabwe. It is huge. And so the challenge of that is there's not kind of consistent power. The actual network of power goes in and out all the time. And you're making a huge building that you need tens of thousands of people to be able to use. Also, we don't really have any money. Is basically who wants to be the architect that signs up for that problem? Because it turns out buildings in Zimbabwe use a tremendous amount of energy to keep the people inside of it cool. Because it's a desert climate. It's very cold at night and very hot during the day. And this needs to have tens of thousands of people going through it. It's a very big challenge. Mick Pierce, the architect of this building, had a chance encounter with the biologist. And they're talking about Zimbabwe or whatever it was. I won't pretend to know what that conversation was like. But the biologist brought up the fact that actually termites who live in Zimbabwe have a very cool way of regulating their temperature, which is, those big termite hills, like not the kind that we have probably anywhere we live, but in like an African desert. Those big termite hills, it turns out, need to keep the fungus that the larvae of these termites feed on. That fungus can only exist at a very specific temperature, otherwise it dies. But they have a 100-degree Fahrenheit shift over the course of a day. So how are they doing it? They basically, these big mounds are filled with little tunnels that let air in and out. And all day long, different termites move piles of dirt around to change the way air flows through the mound, and they keep the temperature within a 5 to 7 degree Fahrenheit range. And that's what keeps this fungus alive and their larvae alive and why they thrive in that environment. This building is the concrete version of that. You see how it's all vented? By the way, you're looking at like 1% of it. It's a huge structure taking up like multiple city blocks. This thing lets wind in and out of it. It then has walls that you can move back and forth to shift how the wind is. So basically the air temperature difference, the temperature difference between the air and the concrete, when you need to warm the air, you just route the air differently through the building to warm it up. Or when you want to cool it, you route it differently and you keep it all regulated. This building only uses 10% of the energy of any other building of its size. So we talked about kind of those like disproportionate returns on innovations. That's 10x better than anything we've done before by copying biology. This is now, I don't know, 10 years old, I want to say, 8 years old. This is incredibly common in architecture now. Not this like venting system, but using biology. In fact, there's now conferences that bring architects and biologists together because these two industries have come together and said, actually a lot of what you know is really helpful. I mean, now most architects turn to nature first. That sounds obvious now. It was not obvious when these two industries had nothing to do with each other back in the day. But it's also led to kind of a general shift in the way we combine unrelated fields. Does this all make sense as a way to get to innovations, right? Again, this came from just kind of a chance encounter. This is the one thing that I've actually worked on that I'm going to present. Who here's heard of homeless hotspots? Wow, that's amazing.
Was that at South by?
It was at South by. So this was a largely controversial idea. Everyone wants to ask me about the controversy of it. We can talk about that afterwards. For now, I'll tell you what this idea was and how it works. So I worked at an agency called BBH. I ran something called BBH Labs. BBH in New York in particular was very into fighting homelessness as a cause. We'd had like a number of programs we'd done, including volunteering at a soup kitchen, et cetera, and suddenly became kind of a passion project for the agency for a few years. And for who here has been to South by or is at least familiar with South by Southwest? Yeah, most of you? Okay, so you get it's like an interactive entertainment festival in Austin. I went to school in Austin, so I'm very familiar with Austin. The worst part about South by Southwest every year is watching a bunch of guys who look like me. They generally have like cool sneakers on and an iPhone in their hand, and they walk like this past actually a very large collection of homeless people either panhandling for money or trying to sell a street newspaper. And basically you have groups of people, like just huge groups of people, treating this population like they're invisible. And it was a terrible problem, and it's still a terrible problem. This exists in many cities, but South by is like the worst version of it. So at this time, we're like, well, let's see if we can do something about that. See if we can do something at South by to help address this issue. So we looked into first the street newspaper thing, because everyone familiar with what a street newspaper is, right? Generally a homeless person, generally in a program, tied to a shelter, gets to buy a street paper for 25 cents and sell it for $1. It's run like a small business almost, right? A good street paper is also made, the content of it is also made by the homeless individuals, right? So in this case, we're like, well, I think the newspaper might be the problem, so we reach out to a shelter. And one of the most interesting things happens in that conversation, which is, again, we're a marketing entity, and we're talking to a very large, prominent homeless shelter in Austin. And we come to understand the way that street newspapers work is nothing like we thought. We assumed it's about the money. Buy it for a quarter, sell it for $1. It turns out it's not about the money. They think of the income as the secondary benefit. And the primary benefit is that the newspaper is a social object that lets a homeless person have some type of interaction with mainstream society. Because it turns out that one of the main corollary variables in homelessness is your level of isolation. If you do not have a network or you are isolated, you are much more likely in the same set of circumstances to end up homeless than someone who's just down on their luck and has a network they can tap into. You start feeling invisible, compounds the problem, and you just accelerate down that path. And the street newspaper, even when you don't buy it, is a conversation that is of extreme value. It maintains social skills, it helps you stay engaged, it helps you tell your story, you feel less invisible, a million other benefits. This idea was, well, okay, that's interesting. So first, let's change what we're offering. Instead of a newspaper at South by Southwest, we offered 4G connections. Again, 4 years ago, a 4G connection was a huge upgrade in Austin. But the only way you can get on that network, which you have to pay for, you kind of pay what you want in this case, is you have to talk to this person. So now this kind of invisible, I mean, in theory you could go up and try to like read it off their shirt because it's in very small print, but you have to go and introduce yourself to someone like Clarence, who's one of the 13 individuals we had do this. That was interesting because of how the homeless advocacy groups all thought of it as this genius breakthrough. When we looked at it and said, the genius part is that you guys understand, and we looked at the genius breakthrough as understanding the role of the social object in this dynamic. So again, it's a two unrelated fields, and this one being marketing and the other one being homeless advocacy, coming together and solving a problem. This was way too controversial to then continue to call homeless hotspots and launch, but this same mechanic has now been used worldwide in a bunch of different places. I think the last one I saw was in the Czech Republic just a few months ago. That was announced. This happens in music festivals. Anyone in Northern Europe may have already seen this happening. Again, all different kind of organizations and groups, but that same mechanic kind of being borrowed across these two industries. Questions, comments on this? I never present homeless hotspots. Nice change. Transforming audience into creative communities. So this is another one. Here's the thing. This gets labeled kind of crowdsourcing a lot. Crowdsourcing is a very, I think a lot of people think of crowdsourcing as like have a contest, take the best idea, and then go with that. I would say when I'm looking at how big innovations have happened, it's more about creating a community, specifically a community that has good creative outputs. That's very different than just kind of an open-ended contest. So just a quick example here. Who's familiar with Lego Cuso? You are? You are? I think the three of us read the same books. Okay, well, I'll let this explain it.
Have an idea for a new Lego product? Build it and submit it to Lego Cuso. A good project can take weeks or longer to design. Think it through and do your best. Your peers are going to vote on it. In fact, they're building their own ideas too. That's it. All right, finished. Now, create a project on Lego Cuso and add your photos. Write a good description and clearly explain your concept. Add the right tags so people can find your project. Once you publish it, people can vote for it. Spread the word on social networks, fan forums, blogs, and websites so people can come vote. If 10,000 people vote for your project, it will qualify for the Lego Review, which happens once every quarter. Your project will join the others that also reach 10,000 votes. Once a quarter, the Lego Review Board examines each qualifying project. This is a thorough process that takes a couple months to complete. When finished, they announce one model that passes review to become a set. You'll get the credit, and the Lego Group will pay you 1% of the net sales. Lego Cuso. Make your Lego wish come true.
Mathematically, giving someone 1% is the worst possible financial deal. I mean, that doesn't match anything we've learned about how businesses work, right? So no one is doing this for the money. You're not going to get rich even if you have a brilliant idea that Lego uses. In fact, if you look at the terms of this, you're going to get much less than you deserve. The only commitment we're making, even if you get 10,000 people to agree to buy this in advance, is that we'll look at your idea. They're not promising you it's going to come out. It's not a set system. But you're going to get credit on the box. That credit on the box is incredible. So one of the ideas that came out of Cuso is the Lego Minecraft stuff. Yes, like the most popular Lego thing was the result of this. It's also something that's been growing across different networks and regions. That community is powerful. If you look at the way they even talk to someone whose now picture or name is on a box, they're legends in this community. Like this is truly a creative community because Lego knows how to actually run it like a community. This is not a contest. Again, you haven't heard of it. They aren't just saying open ideas for submissions. We care a lot about who's in here. Generally, it's existing enthusiasts. We help with those relationships and we ensure that what comes out is really good. That's different than just kind of crowdsourcing, and hopefully that's clear. You should at least check out what the Cuso site looks like. It started in Japan, so only part of it's in English. It's actually very hard to even find an English version of it, but now it's starting to show up in Europe, so it's certainly worth doing. One more example of kind of creative communities here is Local Motors. This is a really weird company here in the US. It's basically a car company. Well, that's local, and by local I mean they make the car in a particular region. In this case, that's called the Rally Fighter, which I think is a really cool looking car, but obviously I have an American aesthetic. And this particular car goes off-road and is also would be cool to drop off out of LA, and that's because in Phoenix, Arizona, which is like a desert kind of off-roading climate, that's of course the car you design. What's interesting about Local Motors though is they don't know what car they're going to make. This car company is built as you basically pay to get in, and then you all design a car. They don't do anything. We talked earlier about Quirky or other companies helping you or telling you, no, that's not right. This company says, make whatever you want to make. You then decide how you award everyone. So if you came up with the design and you came up with the windshield wipers, the community would figure out kind of how much each of you gets for your contributions. And then you all have to agree on it, because you all are basically going to buy this car. And then you all agree, and Local Motors then comes in and leases you a factory to make it in. Yes, you actually make your own car too. That is, if you were to pitch an idea to someone to say, imagine I could have a car company and I didn't know how to make a car, design a car, and I didn't have any labor costs. That sounds like something you probably want to put $1 into, at least from an investor standpoint. The only reason that works is not because crowdsourcing is a genius idea, but because Local Motors is built to actually be a community, right? So I don't think I need to belabor this point. Hopefully you get it. So if you're talking about how you get to innovation, simplifying problems, combining unrelated fields, and creating communities, not like just crowdsourcing or starting contests, all three of those things are kind of staples of marketing. I mean, that's what marketers do, I think. I mean, it's a very specific type of creativity, to answer your question, but I think it's actually the creativity that marketers in general are best at. That makes me really optimistic about that being the future. So if innovation services help companies introduce things, make sure they're relevant, and make sure they're new, and currently marketers help with like brand building and stewarding or feedback or what, creative ideas, etc. What is the gap between these two things? Like, how do you get from being a marketing entity to being an innovation entity, right? As we're thinking about what the reinvention of marketing looks like. And I think what's missing here is actually, and this is a quote I love, which is by my friend Don Draper, which is after he comes back from like his sabbatical, his forced sabbatical. He says, "Who the hell's in charge? A bunch of accountants trying to make $1 into $1.10." This is perfectly, who here, of all the marketing folks in the room, who here works at an ad agency? I know, yep. So the thing in ad agencies is you're not allowed to let the suits run things, right? Because that would be destroying the beautiful creative idea, right? And this, I think, epitomizes that kind of culture of like, this isn't about spreadsheets, it's about the power of ideas. Actually, the reason that agencies, by the way, I'm much more optimistic about marketers at big companies than I am about agencies as it relates to reinventing marketing, is that this just hasn't happened yet, but it needs to. Commercial expertise, actually letting that guy in the suit or the one who knows, the woman who's great at Excel, actually instead of looking down on that skill, that's actually what's preventing marketer or marketing skill sets from elevating to what I think of as innovation skill sets. This is certainly starting to happen, but there's a lot of blocks. And I think the biggest one is cultural in terms of the way that a lot of at least marketing departments or agencies are run. So this gap, just to summarize, is commercial expertise. What would commercial expertise look like? I think it's incubator-like services, stuff we talked about, business modeling and forecasting. Very few kind of marketing groups are capable of doing that. It takes a banker to do that. It's the reason that I founded Finch 15 with a banker. Incubator-like services, that's something RGA or a company like that does, but very few agencies actually do. Measurement and feedback, almost every agency does that, but mostly or every marketing department does, but they do it for generally creative things and not commercial things. That's a different style of measuring and feedback. And then prototyping and testing. Luckily, a lot of kind of digital marketing departments and agencies already do that. But layering these together is how you, I think, elevate from marketing services to innovation services. That's what I would call actual innovation of the marketing industry to get to being an innovation service. In other words, that would be reinventing marketing as innovation via innovation. That's it. Thank you, guys.